Well, hello. I think we're ready to begin. My name is Susan Gunn. I'm the director of the Maryknoll Office for Global Concerns in Washington, D.C. And we are here today for a great conversation with great friends. And we're going to talk about From Amazon to Action, Faith Perspectives on COP30, the UN Climate Change Conference that was just held in Brazil with thousands of attendees, and we have three great friends with us today who are going to share about their experiences and what we can do going forward for climate action. I just want to give you a quick overview of who will be speaking and then let them have the show. We're going to hear from Lisa Sullivan, who is here in Washington, D.C. at the Maryknoll Office for Global Concerns. Lisa is our Senior Program Officer for Integral Ecology, and she's been going to these UN climate change conferences for a few years now, and she'll be able to share with us her perspectives on what was new and what is hopeful going forward. And we're really excited to also have with us Gina Castillo, a wonderful friend of ours who works with Catholic Relief Services down the street in Baltimore, but we keep bumping into each other in international conferences around the world. So a great partner to Maryknoll. Gina is the senior climate policy and research advisor for Catholic Relief Services and also attended the COP30 in Brazil. And we also have with us Blair Nelson, Executive Director of Water Spirit, which is a spiritual ecology nonprofit to help people deepen their awareness of the sacredness of water. A great friend of Maryknoll at the UN in New York, and where Blair represents the Congregation of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Peace, and also was at COP30 in Brazil. We do hope to have a fourth person join us. We'll see if the internet works in our favor in the next few minutes. Maryknoll priest from Kenya, Father Patrick Okoke, who was with us at the climate change conference in Brazil and is now back in Kenya. So we hope that he will appear. So fingers crossed that the internet works out. But without further ado, I'd like to pass it to Lisa.
Thank you so much, Susan. It's great to be here. And thank you to Olivia, who's going to put some slides on here to begin to speak. It's great to be with these amazing colleagues. Maybe one before that, Olivia, there we go, who are with me. We were all there together at COP. Um, so what an amazing adventure this COP was. Flying over the rainforest was an amazing experience as well. And there you have a picture of both Father Patrick Okoke and I entering COP30 on the first day. It was held in the heart of the Amazon in Belém, Brazil. For me, it was a homecoming going back to Latin America. For many, it was the heat. The natural surroundings were just really unique to a COP. Next slide, please. So this COP came out of the hottest year on record, 2024. We not only had heat, we had droughts, we had floods, fires, as all of us know. And so the urgency of these international climate gatherings could not be overstated. Next. So COP means Conference of the Parties. The parties are the parties to the treaty, the UN Framework Treaty on Climate Change. And so why is it called COP30? Well, it's taken us 30 times to try to come together. The parties to this treaty include almost all the countries of the world. 197 countries are parties. The three exceptions to that were Yemen, Iran, and Libya, and now have been joined by the United States. Those are the four countries that are not parties, leaving 196 countries. This is the 30th go-around, the 10th go-around under what's called the Paris Agreement, which really brought people to have a more specific goal of keeping global temperature rise to 1.5. But this COP began at a hopeful moment. The previous two COPs took place in fossil fuel nations, petrostates really, in Azerbaijan and the United Arab Emirates. even though some important results came out of those COPs. But the fact that this COP was taking place in the Amazon, such a vital ecosystem to regulating our climate, and where so many indigenous people are the ones who are caring for this ecosystem. So to hear their voices, to have that land as a backdrop, raised hopes incredibly entering this COP. Next. Uh, next. Oh, there we go. Oh, I'm not sure what happened. Is that the one? Okay. So what usually happens at the COPs? It's a 100 ring circus. There's the negotiations among the parties, but there's side events and plenaries and actions. There's a lot happening under one big tent. But this COP was even more unusual. So next. And what made it unusual was that surrounding the COP throughout the city of
Hello to everyone who is still on this call. As you can see, the Maryknoll Office of Global Concerns appears to be experiencing some kind of technical difficulty. Everybody from their team has logged out at this point, including Lisa, who is in the middle of a presentation. So I will ask you to grant us some grace and some patience as that team does some troubleshooting and hopefully logs back in so that we can pick up where we left off. I'm going to see if I can get in touch with them another way, and we'll give it another couple of minutes to see if they can get back on. If not, Gina and I will pick it up from there. So please hold tight just for a moment. All right. Gina, I'm not having any luck getting through to folks. I think perhaps what we should do is go ahead and move into the next section of our presentation, if possible. Do you have your slides and would you be able to share them from your screen?
Can certainly try.
All right.
Okay.
Oh, pause right there. I see Susan coming back on.
So sorry about that. We had some sort of loss of internet at our office in Washington, D.C., so I'm joining from the data on my phone. Thank you, Blair, for steering the ship. And I'm hoping that Jean is able to give her presentation as well.
Well, I think that's exactly where we are. Susan, would you like Gina to jump right in and start speaking while everybody
Please
else
do,
is
yes.
out? All right,
Yeah.
Gina, over to you.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Gina Castillo, and I work for Catholic Relief Services. Can everyone see my slides? Can you? I can't hear you. Blair, no?
No, not yet.
Okay, let's. Blair, do you want to go? Okay,
All right.
let's
Well,
see.
in the spirit of Christmas, our webinar has gotten attacked by gremlins, but still we press on because we are flexible and dedicated to what we're talking about. So my portion of today is an explanation of an aspect of COP, which is not always given attention in a lot of feedback webinars about these COP conferences. My portion of today's presentation focuses on ocean actions at COP30. As Executive Director of Water Spirit and CSJ and Sisters of St. Joseph of Peace representative at the UN, I pay a lot of attention to both freshwater and the ocean actions. And I just got notice that somebody is hearing a double voice when I speak. That goes beyond what I know how to solve. I'm so sorry, Marie Laure. I'm going to press on. I'm going to hope that no one else is experiencing that issue. Next. All right. So for my piece, I'm going to bring up a few photos so you can see a little bit of what I got to see at COP31. All right. So This was my first climate COP, I'm happy to say, and I was able to access the Blue Zone and get behind the scenes thanks to Mary Knowles and my friends at the Presbyterian Church of the USA as well. So thank you, thank you, thank you for helping me get access. And I was excited to go to my first climate COP, not only to return to Brazil, which I know very well, but also to follow up on some of the commitments made in June at the UN Ocean Conference in Nice, France. So at Nice, both Brazil's President Lula and his environmental minister, Marina Silva, declared that COP30 would be the COP of the ocean. And at a high-level event, they launched the Blue NDC Challenge. Now, the NDCs are climate action commitments that the nations of the world make as part of this COP process. And the Blue NDC Challenge would encourage more member states to include ocean-based actions in those climate commitments, which makes sense. The ocean is the world's largest carbon sink, so our climate actions shouldn't just be land-based, they should be ocean-based as well, provided that they protect those ecosystems. However, I was disappointed to see that by the end of COP30, the COP had become not the COP of the ocean as promised, but the COP of the forest and the COP of the truth and the COP of a whole bunch of other things. But the ocean took less of a front and center role than I had originally thought it was going to. At the end of COP30, only 17 countries had made commitments that were ocean-based in their NDCs. So only 17 took up the invitation to join the Blue NDC Challenge. And 17 out of 190 some countries isn't particularly many. So there's still a lot of room to grow. There was an ocean-themed day with many high-level events. At one event, there was talk of greater alignment between countries' climate change commitments and their biodiversity commitments and their upcoming marine biodiversity commitments under the new High Seas Treaty, or BBNJ. And this is movement in a positive direction. It makes sense that our environmental actions shouldn't be siloed into climate here, biodiversity here, ocean over here. These, in fact, should be commitments that support all three areas at the same time. At one of the high-level events, they also launched an Ocean Breakthroughs dashboard. So you can Google the Ocean Breakthroughs dashboard to see a centralized place where progress toward ocean commitments is being collected. There was also a dedicated ocean pavilion. There was an in-person component to the ocean pavilion and a virtual component. The panel presentations that were going on all the time, both online and in person, are still available to the public. The virtual ocean pavilion is open until the 22nd. So you have 5 more days to take in some great informative panels if you're interested. I also got to take in a session about the marine protected areas. So marine protected areas in international waters are going to expand under the High Seas Treaty, which goes into force in mid-January. And on this panel, I got to hear a demonstration project about a marine protected area in the Azores called the Blue Azores Project, which, according to these presenters, was an example of including on-the-ground grassroots community voices in the planning process for these protected areas. So I'm looking forward to learning more about that project and seeing what kind of lessons we can learn as the High Seas Treaty goes into force next year. Now, unfortunately, as I mentioned, my hopes for the COP for the ocean were somewhat dashed, but there is still some hope that COP31 will include more ocean voices, particularly from Pacific leadership. For a brief moment, it seemed like COP31 was going to head to Australia, so where it would be a little bit easier for them to attend and access. But by the end of the conference, we learned that COP31 will be taking place in Turkey under the presidency of Australia. And I will say that coming from the perspective of a faith-based organization, I was, hoping to see more space and more people talking about the ocean as something other than just an inert resource that exists for humans to make use of. Apart from faith spaces and indigenous people spaces, there was little room for discussion of the ocean as a subject, as something that has inherent rights, or even as a relative. I went to one panel in the Ocean Pavilion where 2 different indigenous women, one from Panama, one from Colombia, spoke of ocean as grandmother, as relative, And we need to include these other cosmovisions and worldviews in our approach to the ocean to truly be inclusive of everybody. I was also dismayed to see that there was very little linkage drawn between the International Plastics Treaty and what was happening in the COP space. The reason why I see these two as interlinked is because plastics come from fossil fuels. And in both major international treaty spaces, it's the same fossil fuel lobbyists and bad faith actors that are stalling progress. There was a little bit of a civil society movement to hashtag kick out the suits in an effort to decrease the presence of fossil fuel lobbyists at COP30. In fact, there were 1,600 fossil fuel lobbyists there. That's 1 in 25 people. However, the movement did not have as much traction as I would have liked to see. Now, at this point, I'm going to pull down my photos and we'll see how Gina's doing and see if she can share a little bit more beyond just this slice of ocean action.
I just wanted to check with Susan because I think the Marino folks are back. Or nope. Well, let me share. Oh.
There
Can
it is,
you-
Gina. We can see it.
Okay. So let me, in the interest of time, I will go quickly. So this is my fourth COP, and I have always been following the discussions on adaptation. So I follow more the official discussions. As Lisa was saying, COP has a variety of things going. And so I tend to just stick to the blue zone and follow what governments and their delegations are saying. And this COP, as Blair said, it was an ocean COP. It was supposed to be a finance COP, and it was also supposed to be an adaptation COP. Adaptation was finally going to get its moment in the spotlight because of, as many of you know, within the UN official discussions, adaptation has been historically marginalized. And part of the challenge has to do with the way the global goal on adaptation is articulated. As you know, in the Paris Agreement, adaptation is referred to as enhancing adaptive capacity, strengthening resilience, and reducing vulnerability to climate change. Now, these are all really, really important words. But at the same time, how this then gets turned into actions has been very challenging for parties to agree on. Climate mitigation, we know the focus, we know how to measure it. It's about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and you can track it. With adaptation, it's very context dependent. There's a lot of sectors involved. So how do you make sense of this global goal on adaptation? So for the last couple of 4 years, the discussions on adaptation have been getting more specific. So 2 COPs ago in Dubai, the governments were able to agree on a framework that encompasses 7 sectors. So when we talk about adaptation, it's referring to these sectors.
Work.
I'm hearing an echo. So at this COP, going into this COP, what we wanted to see, first of all, developing countries wanted to see more finance being dedicated to adaptation. They were actually calling for a tripling of adaptation. This agreement was finally reached on week 2, on the final days of COP. Also, the Adaptation Fund, which is governed within the UNFCCC, was able to secure pledges from governments, or from Germany, Spain, Sweden, and Ireland. So they were able to get 135 million in new pledges. This was down 2 COPs ago. They got more money. So while we see that the rhetoric is really about providing more finance, when it comes to delivering on the part of developed countries, that is still the challenge. Another thing that was on the negotiating table was around the indicators. So countries at this COP needed to agree on adaptation indicators. So this is really important because how do you measure what you're doing on the ground is actually making people safer, more resilient? So in the final days of COP, countries were able to agree on a list of 59 indicators. So this provides a reference set for tracking adaptation progress and results. Now, at this COP, I would say that adaptation is rising. In spite of the challenges that we have with respect to the delivery of climate adaptation finance, the framing around adaptation is changing. And as I said, I've been following the negotiations for 4 years. Adaptation was always sort of framed around vulnerability. We need to address a country's vulnerability. Now it's being framed in the language of returns, of a global new economy, of the need to provide more products and services, businesses to facilitate adaptation. Adaptation policy is not just smart climate policy, but it's about smart macroeconomics. Again, it's about building the foundation of a new global economy. So I would say that is really very, very new and distinct. The other thing I was asked to follow and talk about today was around just transition. Just transition is about ensuring that the transition to a low carbon, a climate resilient pathway is fair and inclusive. And so you're trying to maximize the benefits and minimize the negative impacts. The Paris Agreement recognized the imperative of a just transition, but it was specifically referenced around ensuring decent work and quality jobs. And so this was formally institutionalized through a Just Transition Work Program that has been at every COP meeting to advance discussions around what a just transition means. Now, at this COP, the huge win was around this mechanism. So parties were debating, do we want a mechanism or do we want an action plan? In the end, they were able to coalesce on the creation of the BAM, which has a fantastic acronym, the Belém Action Mechanism. So it's supposed to be like a way of uniting all efforts. It has the strongest ever COP language. It's grounded on human rights, the principles of equity, protection of indigenous peoples. It recognized for the first time the importance of ensuring that people of African descent are able to meaningfully participate in discussions around just transition. This mechanism, which will be housed within the UNFCCC, will over the course of 2026, it will be the mechanics of that, the principles, how it actually will operate, will all get worked out in the context of 2026. And there's an opportunity for civil society organizations, particularly for faith groups, to provide inputs. Now, the significance of both these two areas of work. Now, with just transition, it's really important to note that this huge win came around through the coalescing of different movements. Just transition started in the US in the 70s, primarily led by the labor organizations. In the last 30 years or so, you see how women's organizations, faith groups, climate groups have all coalesced. So you really see the power of people's movements. And as I said, there's opportunities in the coming months for faith groups, guided by our Catholic social teachings, the importance of dignity, integral human development, to give input into how this BAM, the Belém Action Mechanism, will actually operate. Now, when it comes to adaptation, as I said, there's a new frame that is coalescing, and there's a real promotion of market-based approaches. We see the decline in development assistance, and there's, less money coming in from the public sector, so we want more money coming in from the private sector. And so there's a real push for these innovative approaches to finance adaptation. And so we need to be careful that in this push to get more money for countries, that we're not increasing their debt burden, and we're also not leaving behind the most vulnerable countries. Because what we've seen with the climate finance, that most of it actually goes to middle income countries and not to the most vulnerable. So there's a really important role for continued advocacy by civil society organizations, in particularly faith groups. And I'll stop there and give it back to Susan or Blair. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. Really appreciate your powering through, and it's similar to the hard work that needs to be done at the COP. And one thing that wasn't mentioned yet is the drama during the conference in Brazil was the fire that happened in the negotiations and during the negotiations and in the section where they were conducting the negotiations. So we're always keeping it real, and we're always powering forward. So glad to get the internet back going and to be with you. I see now that Lisa's slides are back on the screen. And Lisa, I invite you to pick up where you had let off.
Okay, well, first of all, congratulations to Blair and Gina stepping right in there and the rest of you hanging on while we lost our internet. I'll kind of go back to where I was sharing a little bit about the fact that this COP was so unique because there was so much happening all around it, so much happening in the city of Belém, which is in the heart of the Amazon. And one of the most extraordinary things happening was the People's Summit towards COP30. About 70,000 people came to join this summit from all over Brazil, all over Latin America, many other parts of the globe. So here's just a few photos of some boats arriving. Over 200 boats arrived with people. There was a flotilla of people arriving, and there were just many actions, activities, a lot of really incredible energy happening around COP. Next slide, please. There was also an amazing march often in the COPs, and this is only my third climate change COP, so I'm learning as we go along, but there's often like a little small march within the halls of COP. But this time there was an enormous People's Climate March that took place in the streets of Belém on Saturday, and tens of thousands of people. Many of us left the official venue to join. There you see me below with Sister Rosita, and the joy that we felt just being surrounded by so many people who are cared about and working for and struggling for and taking action for climate justice, and so many young people. So it was a really extraordinary day that really filled us with a lot of hope. Next. Perhaps the 2 weeks, the day that stood out for me was an amazing day in which the Catholic Church really showed it, the global Catholic Church, its really huge engagement on this issue following both Pope Francis and Pope Leo, their commitment to climate justice. And the Brazilian Church held an all-day or half-day meeting in which they shared kind of the results of spending a year in which they went to all regions of Brazil. Parishes put out information, people gathered, people shared, people brought suggestions. And after that year, they gathered all these ideas and this energy and shared them at a symposium. And at the end of that symposium took place an Eco Martyrs March, and it was just really beautiful. The streets of Belém at night here in the Amazon, just to see, to feel the power of that witness of those who've gone before us, those eco martyrs such as Chico Mendes, we see at the left, and Sister Dorothy Stang, a U.S. Sister who was killed for defending the Amazon and who is an inspiration to many of the Guardians people in the Amazon themselves. And we ended with a mass in which many cardinals and perhaps some 30 bishops celebrated this mass in committing our faith to carrying out climate justice from the littlest, smallest level to the largest levels. And so the basilica was filled with people, and it was just quite extraordinary to feel side. I'm not sure. Can
Lisa,
you hear
you
me okay?
hiccuped for a moment, but now you're back.
Oh, next slide, please. I don't know what happened. Can you hear me? There we go. I hope you saw the previous slide. It was of the Basilic Mass and the Basilica and the Eco Martyrs. So going back to what was taking place in the official zone, we had some 50,000 participants, the usual characters for the most part, country representatives from the 197 countries that are part of this treaty. But we also had fossil fuel lobbyists who as hard as many tried to keep them afar, they managed to find their way in, and we will find out how their influence impacts the results as well. There were national leaders and politicians, businesses, scientists, academics, and civil society was there among the 50-some thousand participants. And those of us who were speaking, we were there as official observers. Next. Um, the main participant, I would say, in all of COP was nature. This is a view coming into Belém, the vastness of the Amazon, flying in and flying over that incredible ecosystem, the lungs, the heart of our planet, right? And so not only did we feel that by arriving and being in Belém, but literally nature was calling every single day. We had torrential downpours. The first day when this happened, I was in a meeting and all of a sudden you just couldn't hear anything. And someone said, please turn off that air conditioning or whatever that machine is. And we realized it was the rain, the pouring torrential rain. And we just had to be in silence for 5 or 10 minutes and just listen to the rain. And so it was just really eloquent how nature brought its voice even into the official dialogue. So every day we had that experience. Some places were flooded within the venue, so nature was present. Sometimes on the way to the venue, mango trees would drop mangoes. I would just pick them up. A couple times I was in a taxi driver pulled up, swept his hand on the street and pulled out a mango and passed it back to me. So just nature in all its beauty and its glory was very present. Next. But also present were many Catholics representing Catholic organizations, Catholic communities, Catholic leaders, lay people. And these are just some of the faces of the extraordinary people that were there, those Catholic voices. The two top ones are sisters from Uganda and from Argentina, and they are just, their entrega, their dedication is really inspiring. And to be there with them was just so wonderful. On the bottom left is a colleague of Gina's. That's Andu from Madagascar, who's one of the many CRS representatives there. CRS is doing extraordinary work in helping people adapt, prepare for what is coming with climate change. She is in Madagascar, where they're a very vulnerable nation, and sharing those from those voices. In the middle is Patrick, Father Patrick Okoke, who might be joining us. We hope perhaps his internet might be working now. He was there as well as our host. That's Juan Felipe of Repam. We were so fortunate. While many people were struggling to find where to stay, we were able to stay at the Bishops' Conference, but hosted by the Repam, the Pan-Amazonian Network. And so not only did we feel the Amazon around us, but we were daily having meals with different Catholic Church leaders and lay people who are working in these 9 Amazon countries. So that was very poignant. And then in the bottom right, one of my favorite people of the 50,000 that I met was with Susana. She's a Brazilian theologian and just had incredible vivacity. She's from the Laudato Si movement. And so just as some of the examples of some extraordinary representatives there in civil society and from the Catholic Church. Next. And Catholic leaders were there as well. And as Mary know, we even played a minor part in that. Months before COP began, many of us were trying to organize side events. They have to be submitted months ahead of time. And so with some partners, we really wanted to raise up a really extraordinary document. I think you'll get this in your link. It's a document that was put out by the bishops' conferences of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And it was a document in which it's their voice, what they want to share to the COP30. And so there's just such an extraordinary document to reflect all these voices of people who are most being affected by climate change. So we reached out on a whim to the cardinals who head up the Asia, Africa, and Latin America bishops' conferences to invite them to speak. And lo and behold, they each agreed. Um, until a day before COP, I was to travel for COP, I got a call from someone from the Vatican who was reminding me that they had another event that was kind of more prestigious, perhaps, with the vice president of COP, and that they would prefer to wait and have them speak there. So they said that they would solve that problem by giving us three other cardinals. So in the end, we instead of three cardinals, we had six cardinals, I think, at our event, three on the panel and three in the public. And it led to a really extraordinary dialogue of what these Catholic bishops, global South bishops, are the voices that they want to raise up. And then there was also responses. For example, that's Cardinal Nemeth in the front there, leaning down with me. He's the European vice chairman of the European Council of Bishops. So hearing others from Europe and from Canada responding in solidarity to this call. So it was just a really beautiful manifestation of their commitment. Next. Also present, the United States, as you know, pulled out on day one of the Trump's his first day of the second administration. He pulled out of the Paris Agreement. So officially, the U.S. government was not there. However, there were many U.S. citizens there and leaders, and among them, Senator Whitehouse, top left. He was the only senator able to go because this was during the government shutdown. He funded his own way there. He made it happen. He probably spoke some 30 times. He was extraordinary in affirming how, although the federal government may not be there, many U.S. citizens, leaders are committed to the goals of the Paris Agreement and are doing many things in cities and states to fulfill the goals that need to happen, the actions that need to happen for that goal. Also, Governor Newsom up the top right, he's part of the America's All In coalition. There were many subnational leaders, mayors, et cetera, sharing the incredible initiatives that are taking place in the U.S. And so U.S. was present. On the bottom right there, that slide, some of my colleagues, some faith leaders, we did another panel on U.S. faith commitment to the Paris Agreement. And one of the friends there with white hair is Trig Talley, who used to lead the negotiations for the United States. And it was just beautiful to see somebody who, although he's no longer there in official capacity, just how he leads from the heart and how so much believes and is putting that capacity he has to help in many ways. So the U.S. was present. Next. So I'm glad that Gina spoke and shared a lot about adaptation. That these are the three themes that kind of divide the workload in COP: mitigation, adaptation, and finance. And since I got cut off internet, I didn't hear her entire talk, but pretty much there was grave disappointment with mitigation, trying to reduce the fossil fuels, and much, not high marks in terms of finance. So those two issues really did not carry the day at COP. And I think adaptation did a better job, as Gina did a good job of sharing. Next. As we were coming to the second to the last day of COP, tensions are high. What will the decision be? What will the big outcome be? And we happened to be at a meeting with the Holy See delegation, and all of a sudden we got a text message, leave the building immediately. There's a fire. We happened to be quite near the fire. We left the building. As you see, a fire broke out. Fortunately, no one was hurt. But it was really symbolic, I think, of the burning of fossil fuels that is so visible and so much a part of why this problem is happening. And yet, the final text, the final agreement, did not include anything about fossil fuels. And so many of us really felt really disappointed about this. We had so many expectations for COP. And part of the reason that happens is because all decisions must be consensus. There can be 2 or 3 countries that say no, and it's no. So that's pretty much what happened, is certain fossil fuel producing states blocked outcomes that would have continued to help countries stop producing fossil fuels, stop using fossil fuels. Next. But this was to me, the most powerful moment of my 2 weeks in the official blue zone of COP. This was the last day, the last morning, And in the face of the fact that it was clear that fossil fuels would not come in the final text, um, over 80 countries were backing the idea that there'd be fossil fuel transition spelled out in the final text. So some of them decided to organize an alternative event. And here's a press conference in which the governments of Colombia, excuse me, Colombia and the Netherlands are announcing that they were co-creating the first international conference on the transition away from fossil fuels, which will take place in April in Colombia. And they got a standing ovation probably for 10 minutes. People were realizing, well, if everybody's not going to do the right thing, well, then let's go forward to the ones who are willing to do it. And so that was just a really exciting moment to see what we call the coalition of the willing to do something. And so this conference that will take place in April will bring together many, many nations and civil society, et cetera, to see how can we move forward on transitioning out of fossil fuels. Next. And as I was leaving the venue, my last day, I saw this little piece of artwork. It was just empty boxes that were building the image of the Paris, right? The image of Paris and the Paris Agreement, and the sign fragile. And just a realization that what we are trying to do to work together as nations, to come together as one to try to solve the gravest problem facing us, it is extremely fragile. And yet, the graph above shows that things have been done. Temperature rise has been somewhat kept down because of these agreements. And so it's worth keeping on and trying. And that little mathematic formula there, it's from a talk that I saw from some friends who shared, one of the hopes, perhaps, of those who were not in favor of the Paris Agreement was that 197 minus 1 would equal 0. In other words, if the US pulls out, this just won't go forward. It's not tenable. But that wasn't true. 197 minus 1 just equaled 196. The rest of the country stayed in. Fragile, not everything was far from perfect, but they're still sitting around the table and trying to find ways to solve this. Next. So I would say my biggest takeaway from COP was that official multilateralism is worth it, but it's struggling. Multilateralism of the willing is rising, and I'm going to bank on that. And grassroots multilateralism is leading, and I'm all in there. And that was really affirmed by Pope Leo, who was following Francis's footsteps, who said, the most effective solutions will not come from individual efforts alone, but above all from major political decisions at the national and international levels. So calling on us at all levels to do what we can as individuals, but also to continue these multilateral initiatives. Next. This is just a beautiful image. This was from Pope Leo blessing an iceberg at a wonderful Laudato Si convention in Rome earlier. But he sent a message to COP, and he asked these cardinals, these are the Global South cardinals, he asked them to present his message in which he affirms their statement, he upholds it, and just that image of them holding onto that fishing net, being connected, to me is just really powerful. And his Pope Leo said, we're guardians of creations, not rivals for its spoils. Next. And then I'll leave you with this image. This is once again Susanna, the theologian, but here she is in the march. I don't know if I got cut out when I was showing the March of the Eco-Martyrs, but she's marching on stilts, no less, and holding this image of Pope Leo in a glass frame. And I don't know how she did it, and in the nighttime. But look at that face of joy and conviction. There were so many young people, and that just filled my soul with realizing these are the ones we need to support. These are the ones who are carrying this struggle forward. And there's a number of image of people carrying the river that came from this previous conference at Laudato Si through the streets of Berlin. We're alive with this spirit. And I'll end with the next slide. Is I'm going to move right away to talking about actions. This is another photo I took at the march. I was just struck by this young man. His t-shirt says he was one of a group that's called Guardians of the Amazon, doing all they can to protect their ecosystem and protect all of us by doing that. And so what I've done is to list what a call that we kind of talked among those presenters, what actions we would invite you to take. And I think somebody's going to drop them in the chat, but I'll just explain briefly. Top left, the main thing I think as U.S. citizens at this point is to take local action. Our government's pulled out of Paris, and so we need to find out how we can support local actions, climate action that is happening. And one great way to do that is to join the Catholic Climate Covenant Encounter, their campaign. And so we have the link how you can sign up for that. The bottom left part, this is a great and creative innovation by the Laudato Si movement. You may know that countries have to turn in what's called the national determined contributions, what their country commitment is to climate action. Well, they came up with the idea after this conference in Rome of having the people's determined contributions. What are we each doing in our homes, in our churches, in our communities, in our parish, in our diocese, etc., to commit to the goals of the Paris Agreement? So we also have that link. Top right, to sign the fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. There's amazing initiatives taking place by Catholics in Florida to have their state sign this, to commit as a state. And so there's hope that other cities, other states, many throughout the globe have already signed this non-proliferation treaty. So we invite you to do that. And finally, in the bottom right, speaking a little bit to the topics that Blair spoke about, there is a letter to Congress asking them to put a pause to stop deep seabed mining, which is just an incredible threat to our oceans. So I'll leave it at that. Again, sorry for all the glitches, but I think there's maybe 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Gina and Blair. I really am so grateful for your resilience. You are leading the way for us to take action. I'm quite struck by the absence of world leaders fulfilling their responsibility to care for the climate, care for the planet and their people. And I'm hearing this message stronger than ever about action at the grassroots level. And I just want to clarify what I hear you saying, Lisa, maybe you can speak more about this, is when you say the grassroots level, is it also, it's not just, say, those of us in parishes or neighborhoods and community groups, but our mayors and our governors of our states, and maybe also our members of Congress, but even more local to that at the state level. And so it sounds like some of these actions to sign on are actions to get your city and your state. And it's remarkable to me that they, at that level, can have influence at this United Nations conference. Can you speak about that and what we can do in the next few months on that?
You captured it perfectly, Susan. I mean, indeed, as U.S. citizens, we're no longer in the Paris Agreement. But that doesn't mean that we can't carry out what the calls for climate action to fulfill those goals. And so all the more, I think we're empowered more than ever in terms of international climate action, because it has to fall on us, individual cities, individual communities, individual states, to take action, to push for climate action. And there is quite a large coalition of the willing. The Americas All In Network represents over 52% of US GDP. And so they are all taking, many, amazing climate action in their states and in their cities. And so they need our support. We need to come up with new actions. So there's many ways to do that. I suggested, I think, in the link you got about joining the Catholic Climate Covenant Encounter. That's a monthly meeting, but they send out links. Because what's important is not just to do it in our own city, but to recognize what we're doing as a country, as a nation, and connect that. That is our power as well. I recently gave another talk, and somebody came up with the idea, let's send a Christmas card to Senator Whitehouse. He was the only one who showed up, and afterwards gave a really important talk to Congress on his visit to COP. So let's support those leaders who are supporting climate action.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'm all in too. Absolutely. And I have a question I'm seeing here for Blair, and it's specifically about the work you do with Water Spirit, and asking what you have available on your website that people could use, because you say that a big focus is to deepen awareness of the sacredness of water and what resources you have specifically on that that you would want to highlight to folks today.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for the question. I love talking about my daily ministry work at Water Spirit. On our website, which is www.waterspirit.org, I can point you in particular toward our calls to action page, which is a regularly updated page where you can do things like send letters and sign petitions and so forth for a number of different water-related advocacy campaigns that we're working on. And climate change is a water issue. We cannot protect water without mitigating the climate crisis. I will also share that on Water Spirit's YouTube channel, there are a number of recorded webinars that share some of these thoughts about how we can deepen our relationship with water, how we can revolutionize our relationship with nature. I will invite you to our upcoming events, including our online book club reading. All of those events are available under the events calendar listing on Water Spirit's website as well. And if I may, I'd like to turn back briefly to the prior question as well. When I was at COP30, I was spending a lot of time, particularly in the first week, with a lot of the Brazilian social movements in particular. And it was truly impressive to be part of a community that is so well organized, really at the forefront of leadership. Brazil's indigenous peoples movements in particular know how to take direct action and get what they want. And to see them using this moment of international attention to really make gains that substantially protect the forest and protect the people at the same time was remarkable. But across civil society, from across the world, from the People's March and the People's Summit and beyond, you really heard a unified call to protect our future. So if this is the will of the people, the question remains, why aren't the governments that are supposed to represent us stepping up and doing what they're supposed to? And for my US audience in particular, please note that I walked away from COP30 with redoubled commitment to fossil fuel actions here at home. And my hope is that you will feel that way too. The world is moving on without us. The climate denialism that is prevalent in the US is not prevalent anywhere else. It's a local thing, and the world has already gotten the message. And at this moment, when our federal government is unwilling to step up and take rational, science-informed, and ethical actions to protect our future, every single fossil fuel-related action that we take here at home strikes at the heart of empire and is needed now more than ever.
Thank you, Blair. So well said. So glad you're here with us. And one last question for Gina. I hope you're still with us. Many of our audience today are members of the Catholic Church, and you're with Catholic Relief Service. So one question that came in was, well, what's next for you? When I read your title at the beginning, that caught this viewer's attention, that you are the Senior Climate Policy and Research Advisor, knowing that politically in the United States that topic is quite difficult right now, that this person wanted to offer you support. What a hard job you have. But now that you've gone to COP30, what's next on your calendar for 2026 for climate policy in the United States?
Well, I think the important thing, and just to pick up on what Blair was saying, that the rest of the world is moving on with or without the US. It is and it isn't. We do see that there is a strain on budgets. And while governments say, yes, climate change is a priority, and we've signed the Paris Agreement, where there is a specific obligation on the part of developed countries to provide assistance, financial assistance, technology transfer. That assistance, despite the rhetoric that, we believe on global climate action, they're still unwilling to, commit, give that envelope, which is a historical responsibility that they have. So I think, continuing to remind governments, leaders, that it's important, that climate is not an environmental issue, it's a whole of society issue that is going to affect all sectors of our society, economics. So I think the interesting frame around adaptation, that we need to be building that new economy that takes into account climate risks, that ensures equity, that leaves no one behind. That's kind of the my motivation and the frame that I'm taking into 2026. And as I said, the other is around the delivery of this money and ensuring that it's not adding to the debt burden of countries. Right now, there's a whole set of instruments that are being promoted just because the state is not willing, not to say that it doesn't have the money, but it's allocating the money to things like, building up a defense budgets. That's what's happening not only in the US, but in Europe. And so we need to push back on that and think about new ways of generating money that should be going to building up the resilience of not only in the US, if we think about the inequities that exist in the US, but also globally, and how do we support the most vulnerable countries, which is in the case of CRS, that's our mission. We work in some of the poorest countries in the world with some of the most marginalized communities, as Lisa said, in Madagascar. And so they're being hit time and time again. So how do we ensure that the climate support that they're getting goes to actually build their resilience and not add to their debt burdens? So that's what I'm going to be looking at moving forward, is to continue to frame climate as a issue that needs a whole of society approach, looking at these instruments that are being promoted in a way that is inclusive and fair and doesn't increase the debt of poor countries. Back to you, Susan.
Wonderful, thank you. So glad you're there, Gina. And thank you to each of our panelists. Thank you to Lisa and to Blair and to Gina. And thank you to those of you who joined us for today. I don't want you to forget those action points that Lisa shared. You can find them in two places on our website, which is www.maryknollogc.org. And then also we will email everyone who registered for this to share the recording and easy links to each of those action alerts and the resources that were shared in the chat. So let's stay connected. Let's follow through on these actions and be all in for climate. Thanks, everybody.